we were forced to rescind our roles, and our law was suspended. And then just recently here in 2010, our law was unsuspended. It was changed a little bit, and we're now in the process of developing roles again. But the main thing was, is as part of this whole process that we went through with the legislature of the suspension of our law and rescinding the rules, we were required to do a study, an operation and failure rate study, and we went out to the local health districts, we surveyed them, we obtained a lot of information, and we found that we had a failure rate of about 23%. And given that, we felt that, well, we really are going to need to do something to find funding for people, because we want to be able to install systems that are sustainable, that treat the sewage and yet are cost effective. But we were finding that we had a percentage of the population, and as most frequently as what you probably all find out, is the people who have failing systems are commonly people who don't have the resources to pay for replacing those systems. And so the legislature was very sensitive to that issue. They were very sensitive to the issue of cost, and they still are. So we tried to work with Ohio EPA and other funding sources that we could find, USDA and so on, to identify some different funding mechanisms that might be available for people to help. And so when the ARRA project came up, and we were in the midst of all of this, we got the idea, well, why not? They started talking about the Green Reserve Project, and we said, well, let's see if we can make it a go, and we were able to do that. And we'll talk more about exactly how we did all those details of that in the second part of this presentation. But just to talk a little bit about how we got here, we did use the 2000 census data, and it showed that about 350,000 homes were at or below 200% poverty levels in rural areas. And so we used the census data, we eliminated the census tracts that were within municipalities, and then looked at the data in those specific census tracts with regard to income and poverty levels. And if we looked at a 25% failure rate, then we came up with a number of about 87,500 households that would qualify at or below the 200% poverty level. When we did the survey of the local health districts, and we got a lot of data back, we've also, since July 1st of 2007, we began collecting cost data because the legislature wanted to know what the costs of our systems were. And so we've been collecting that cost data since that time. And what we see is that our state average cost, if you average out the cost across all of the system types, is $8,100. So that gave us some sense. Now we knew that the number of homes that were in poverty, we knew what the failure rate was and what our projected numbers were of failing systems in these rural areas where the income levels were below 200%. And so that gave us a number, which was quite large. So with that, we also developed this report as part of the background of why we were selecting, or why we were trying to move forward and seek this funding. We had to prepare this report. The legislature required it actually in statute. It had to be done by June 1st, 2008, and we had to survey the boards of health concerning household sewage treatment system operations and failure rates. This report is on our website, and I'll tell you what the link is here as we get towards the end. So just a little bit of what we looked at in this report, and this, I think, was very helpful to the legislature. It was very helpful to Ohio EPA in really more definitively identifying what the needs were with regard to wastewater replacement and repairs in Ohio for decentralized systems. And I will also tell you that many of you probably know that the Clean Watershed Needs Survey is coming up next year. We've also, we used the data that we obtained in part from this survey to help with the Clean Watershed Needs Survey. So some of the data that we looked at Ohio EPA, of course, they do the 2008, the Integrated Water Quality Monitoring Report. That would be, I think, what is required by the Clean Water Act at the 303D and the 305B reports. We looked at their total maximum daily load reports that they prepare for each watershed. We also looked at their enforcement data that they've been collecting for about the last 10 to 20 years. Area-wide planning agency reports. We had a couple of area-wide agencies, planning agencies that had gone out and had done some reviews and done some assessments of failing systems in their planning areas. And then, of course, the local health district survey. And most of my presentation is going to focus on this survey. I would just like to summarize, though, the data from the total maximum daily load reports. This was really critical, we felt, because it demonstrated to us that the majority of the impact that we were seeing from our failing systems was a surface water impact. And you'll see why when you, in a couple of slides, when you see the numbers of discharging systems that we have in Ohio. But we did look at 37 final and draft total maximum daily load reports for specific watersheds, and we reviewed those, and so we evaluated a total of 121 sub-watersheds. And of those, about 84% reported a major source of impairment as bacteria, fecal coliforms, or pathogens. And so that's a pretty substantial number. Of the 121 sub-watersheds evaluated, about 76% reported that home sewage systems were that suspected source of impairment. We also have in Ohio bacterial impairment from runoff from farm fields and feeding operations, so and dairy operations. So that was also identified as a source. But for the most part, when Ohio EPA staff do these TMDL reports, they walk the streams. They walk the stream segments, and they count the outfalls, and they identify what the sources are. So it's a very detailed assessment that they perform. And they were able to identify areas with large numbers of discharging sewage systems. Then we also took a look at the EPA enforcement data, and from 1986 through 2007, they've identified 236 communities where failing systems have either caused public health nuisances or environmental degradation has occurred, and or administrative orders to correct have been issued. We have a number of communities in Ohio that are under findings and orders to connect the public sewer. So the county commissioners or the county offices are under orders to do everything in their capability to get sewers to those areas. So we also use that information. Then in Ohio, the way we fund our program is we receive, the local health districts actually implement the program. We have state rules that's implemented at the local health district level. So when someone wants to install a system, they come to the local health district and they obtain a permit. And then with that permit, a portion of that permit fee that they pay comes back to the state. Right now, our permit fee is set at $25 because it's set in statute until we develop new rules, but that will probably be changing. Our permit fee was initially $50. So with that $25, that's what we use to fund our program. But when they send that fee to us, they also are required to provide data on the type of system. So we have actually what's called a transmittal report. And on that transmittal report, it identifies the basic type of system, if it's a replacement discharging system, if it's an on-lot system, if it's above grade, below grade, and then we actually ask for the basic system type, whether it's septic tank to leach line, pre-treatment to leach line, shallow leach, normal depth leach, whether it's a mound, septic tank, or pre-treatment to mound, drip distribution, septic tank, or pre-treatment to drip, or if it's low pressure pipe. And then of course we have discharging system replacements, and those are the primary system types that are being installed in Ohio. So we obtained that data from 2007 till we did through the time that we did this report. And what that showed, and we also asked them in that when they do that transmittals, whether this is a new system or whether it's a replacement or an alteration. And so what we saw that was of the 7,000 permits that were obtained during that time period in 2007, 30% were for alterations or replacements. So that's, obviously some of those will be due to just aging systems, but for the most part, those are systems that were in failure. And what was nice is that was consistent to a certain extent with the actual numbers we saw that was reported from the local health districts. So how we did this survey is we basically developed a survey tool. It was in an Excel spreadsheet, and we asked a number of questions. And because we were also collecting this data as part of the Clean Watershed Needs Survey, we asked them to identify the existing number of systems that they had in their jurisdiction. So this would be in a county health district. We asked them to identify the number of failing systems, and then we asked them to project how many systems they felt would be failing within the next 5 years, because that's something that the Clean Watershed Needs Survey wants to know as well. So we were trying to, kind of kill two birds with one stone here by collecting data for the Clean Watershed Needs Survey, and then also satisfying the legislative requirements to prepare this report. And we asked them a lot of different types of information, and so I'll show you the results that we have here. So this is a summary of the data that we collected from the local health district surveys. We have 88 county health departments and probably about another 5 cities that implement the sewage program. We had 73 health districts respond, even despite the fact that they were required by law to do so. Only 73 did respond. So you can see what our distribution of systems are. They identified that we have about 532,000 total systems. We always have estimated we have about 1 million. We had, probably 10 or 15 health districts that didn't respond, so our numbers may be a little bit lower than we think. We may be closer to 800,000 or 900,000. What you can see here, the numbers by region, but overall we had about a 23% failure rate, was certainly higher in some areas of the state than others. You can see that we have, see if I can get this thing to work. I'm not seeing that it's moving. Are you seeing a cursor or anything moving on the screen? Rebecca. I've clicked on the little pointer thing, the little firecracker looking item, but it doesn't seem to be doing anything. There we go. Now it came up. Now you can see that, right? I'm pointing to failing systems in the Northwest.
Oh yeah, okay. It's there now.
Oh, okay. So you can see that, like in the Northwest and the southeastern portions of the state, we had higher failure rates than in other areas. And what's interesting, when you compare this to the geology and soils of the state, in the northwestern part of the state, of course this was the area of the Great Black Swamp, it is also an area where we have high clay content soils. We have very shallow seasonal saturation in the soils. So what we found with regard to failure rates is very consistent with the geology and the soils of the state. So let me go back to that in just a quick second. Future failing systems, you could see some areas of the state felt more concerned than others that they would be having a higher number of failing systems in the future. But overall, the future failure rate was projected at 13%. Okay, well this is probably the most disturbing piece of information that came out of our survey, and that was the incredibly high percentage of discharging systems that we realized we had in Ohio. In the past, we'd always just made a best guess judgment, a swag, that we had about 25% discharging systems, and what we actually found, it was closer to 37%, which is a great concern because we have a general permit now for the replacement of these systems when they fail, and it does require that they have to try to get an on-lot system on the site before they can have a replacement discharge. But still, when you put in these discharging systems, there is significant maintenance. They need to maintain their coverage under the general permit, so it's a 5-year permit, so they're paying a fee every year. The federal rules require these systems be sampled annually. So getting people to pay for a service contract plus an annual sample has been an extreme challenge for our local health districts. And actually, Ohio EPA and I just have spent the last 2 weeks going around the state doing regional meetings to try to, because our general permit that provides coverage for these discharging systems, or the ones that have been replaced, it's for replacement discharging systems. It's coming up for renewal at the end of this year, and we're going around to identify the challenges and issues that the local health districts have been dealing with, and that's probably the key thing. So if Michigan has been able to avoid discharging systems, please continue to do so, because it's nothing but a real challenge and a real nightmare to deal with. But essentially what we saw here is that we have 30% of our systems statewide are discharging, and about 63% are on lot. And so you can see when you look at the numbers that, particularly in northeastern Ohio, we have a very high percentage of discharging systems, 30%, and that was a great concern. So when you take a look at the fact that if each system on average discharges 360 gallons per day, we've got a substantial amount of effluent going to our streams and waterways. And if you'll recall a couple of slides back where we talked about what the TMDL report showed as far as the percentage of impairment of watersheds and streams by bacteria, you can see why now. I mean, we have all these discharging systems, and to be quite honest, most of them are probably aeration units with straight discharge, or maybe they were septic tanks and sand filters to discharge. That was the 2 common systems that were installed. So you know that they can't meet fecal standards and they can't meet ammonia standards, and they certainly don't provide any additional dissolved oxygen into the streams. So it's a substantial concern. Part of the other thing that we did when we did the survey is we asked each local health district, not only did they go in and they identify the areas that were failing, the number of systems they projected to be failing, but we also asked them to identify the reasons for system failure. And we stepped out some categories that we thought would be, before we did the survey, we actually went around and we asked them for input on the things that need to be in the survey. And so we had identified that we wanted to ask this question about principal reasons for system failure. And so we had these categories already identified. So here you can see old system age as being identified as one of the primary reasons for failure, 20%. And then also 17% were direct discharges that exceed public health nuisance standards. And we actually have a public health nuisance standard in Ohio. It's a bacterial standard of 5,000 fecal coliforms. Also, you'll see that poor operation and maintenance was identified as a high percentage of reason for failure. Space limitations. We are a home rule state. We've had a substantial lack of planning, land use planning that it's not happened very well, and so we had a lot of small lots that were built and developed on, and then soil limitations being kind of the next challenge that Ohio faces. We have a lot of clay-rich soils in our state. It's wonderful from the perspective that it provides us a lot of natural protection from contamination, but it doesn't help us with regard to septic system design. So this information that we obtained was also very enlightening to really help us as we move forward in formulating rules as to the key areas we need to address with rule development, the key areas we need to address with homeowners, this poor operation and maintenance. One of the biggest feedbacks we get from local health districts and from people in general when we go out is they don't know how to take care of their system. Many people, especially here in Ohio, we have a lot of suburban development, and they move out of the city into the country, and it's the first time they've ever been on a well in a septic system, sewage system, and they have no clue. They just flush the toilet as long as it goes away. Of course, that's all they're thinking about. And they don't even realize that they have a piece of wastewater infrastructure in their yard that they need to maintain, just like their roof or their car or any other, anything else they own. So we have a big challenge before us with homeowner education on proper operation and maintenance. And actually, the law, when our law was unsuspended and our law was also changed, the legislature did realize that, and they put in there quite a bit of language about the need for local health districts to ensure that maintenance is occurring and responsibilities of homeowners to maintain their systems. Okay, so the ARRA project, when we heard, of course, a lot about the ARRA money being made available to the states. We started to explore what the options were. We saw that there was going to be a portion set aside for green reserve projects, and we saw that decentralized systems were identified as eligible for funding under the green reserve projects under the innovative environmental projects category. And so at that point, we approached Ohio EPA to request funding for repair and replacement of failing home sewage treatment systems. And it was not initially an easy task. I know Dendra had told me that there's been some resistance to moving forward in this in Michigan as to whether or not it could really work and what there were concerns and so on. Believe me, we addressed the same types of things with Ohio EPA. And it actually took a meeting between the two agency directors to sit down and talk about this, and then actual discussions with the governor's office. And at that time, it was Governor Strickland, and he was very supportive of that funding and that project. Our past director, Director Jackson, was very supportive. He really pushed it. We said, look, the legislature is concerned about this. Cost is one of the major issues. We need to be able to help some folks, help them replace their systems. So with that, Ohio EPA did agree to do that. We originally asked for $20 million. EPA came back and said, we'll set aside $5 million of the ARRA money for this purpose. And there were a lot of challenges in developing that, which we'll talk about in the next presentation, but it's worked out really well, and as we'll talk about next, it's going to be a lot of, we're going to continue this year, and we'll see how it goes. So I think, Dendra, with that, I'm done with this part of the presentation. I'd be happy to answer questions.
Actually, this is your choice to carry on until the next session, 10-minute break. If you want to just go on through and get done early, then we're going to move on to the next presentation right now. Okay, you can live with me, Rebecca. Just quick moment and thought time. And then later you have an extended an extra.
Okay.
Okay, you should be able to start up my group. Okay?
Yeah, I don't see any slides.
Show the slides in that. When the indicator box appears to the other, you'll be able to see it.
I'm sorry, is there something else I need to do?
Nope.
So I don't have any slides here.
Wait 1 second. Go back to the one before. Now you see yours.
Yes. There we go. Now it's up.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay.
So just go ahead and continue with this presentation.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I am going to go ahead and give the presentation for the Division of Environmental and Financial Assistance. The two guys that I worked with there were Jim Bonk and Dave Rife, and they were not available this morning to give the presentation, but we worked with them so closely, we felt pretty comfortable to go ahead. And so I'm going to go ahead and move through their slides and explain how we actually were able to implement funding the repair and replacement of sewage treatment systems using the Ohio Water Pollution Control Loan Fund. Okay, under ARRA, of course, as I mentioned, Ohio EPA did agree to make $5 million available in funding for specifically the repair and the replacement of home sewage treatment systems. And this was administered through the State Revolving Loan Fund, which is the Water Pollution Control Loan Fund here in Ohio. So when the ARRA money was allocated for water and wastewater projects, it came in through the various states that whatever their SRF fund, however that was set up, that money came in through that process. So during this process, or in order to use the money, we had to identify eligible local government entities. And so Ohio EPA in the past has had a lot of experience in working with local government entities, specifically counties and municipal governments on water and sewer districts, on big pipe type applications and of course public water type applications. So they've had a lot of experience working with those folks. So that's who they felt comfortable working with. We had wanted them to sort of allow local health districts to apply for this funding, but they didn't really have any experience in working with local health districts. So they said, look, we really feel the best way for us to implement this, given what our experience has been and how we handle contracts, is for us to run these contracts through the county governments or the city governments or through a water and sewer district, because water and sewer districts in Ohio also are recognized legal entities. So we said, okay. So what we ended up doing is we solicited nominations and we asked the counties to come forward and detail what the total dollars requested that they wanted and the number of systems they were proposing to repair or replace. So how we did this is I actually had been letting local health districts know all along. We have actually a monthly conference call with our local health districts in the sewage program, and we have been letting them know, look, we're working with EPA on this money, start to put together your list. And most of our local health districts, if they've had systems that have been failing forever and a day, you know, they've got that list off to the side all the time, always trying to look for some money or resources to help these folks get a system repaired and replaced. So most of the local health districts had these systems identified, and if you recall from the last presentation, we had just asked them to go through and survey your county and identify those areas of failing systems. So they had those lists readily available. So in a sense, doing that survey helped prepare them for putting together their proposals or their nominations. And so Ohio EPA developed a form where they basically said, this is the entity that's going to ask for the money, this is how we're going to administer it, and these are the number of systems we're going to repair and replace. And we'll talk more about those details. So we worked with Ohio EPA to identify what the eligibility criteria would be, and it was, you know, some back and forth and give and take. What came out was 75% funding of the eligible cost of a home sewage system upgrade, replacement, or repair, with 25% system owner match. And they were flexible with the owner match. I mean, it could be, they were allowed to include the cost of their permit fees in the owner match. So let's say if a local health district charged $250 for the permit fee, they can include that in their match funds. If the contractor was willing to put them on a payment plan for the 25%, as long as there was some type of little written contract between the homeowner and the contractor, they would accept that as 25% match. So some contractors did that, realizing they get at least 75% a payment of the system right now. So people came up with a whole host of innovative ways. We also found that some local health districts were able to work with their community housing improvement programs and the community block development grants, the folks that administer those grants, to help offset some of the costs of the 25% match. Some county commissioners were able to find a little bit of money that they had set aside in a special fund that they let do that. But primarily, the contracts were entered into with the counties or a city or water and sewer district. And I don't think we had any water and sewer districts actually come forward, so they were all counties or cities. And then the counties typically designated, the county commissioners would designate the Community Housing Improvement Program, which has a lot of experience in working with folks on repairs and replacements to roofs and heating and cooling systems and things like that. And those people had a lot of experience in setting up contracts and working with contractors, taking in income information from homeowners to identify whether or not they were eligible. And then the local health district had a role as well in permitting the system and identifying and bringing people into that process. So as we go through the slides, we'll talk about the roles and responsibilities of each entity. So I'll help give you some background on how we did this. So basically, the eligibility criteria, 75% was funded by the project, 25% owner match. There was an income limit of 200% of the Health and Human Services 2009 poverty guidelines. And so for a family of 4, that was $44,100. We very much at ODH wanted it to be 300%, because if you go to 300% for a family of 4, that's about $64,000. And we really felt that given a system average cost of $8,100, I mean that's more than 10% of their annual income, that we really needed to up it to 300%. But the Ohio EPA director at the time felt very strongly about making sure we were going out there and identifying the folks with the greatest need first, and then they said, well, when we come back with subsequent funding, perhaps we can look at expanding those income levels. So this was the eligibility criteria that we had. The systems had to be in contract by November 1st, 2009. So if you remember, the ARRA money became available in very early 2009. So we were on a very fast time frame to get this money spent. And that was part of the challenge of implementing the project through the ARRA funds. It was a very fast time track that we had. But they did provide flexibility on completion. So as long as the system was in contract by November 1st, and actually they ended up extending that to December 1st in a couple of counties that got some extra money that couldn't get spent. But essentially then the systems had to be completed by spring of 2010. Okay, so what types, okay, we talked a little bit about this, what types of contributions from homeowners qualified for the matching funds? Of course, direct cash. They could get funds from any other local, state, or federal program or charitable organization. We did have some charitable organizations come forward and help folks, local churches, foundations, things like that, different, lodges, community organizations. The funds could be spent on site and soil evaluations or system design work for those contracted after 10/1/2008. So the reason I bring this up is that when the money became available, we had a number of people who had already spent money on doing site and soil evaluations, perhaps part of the installation, and they really could use some assistance to get finished. And so we went back, if you had something in progress starting after 10/1/2008, that you could obtain these funds to help finish out your installation. And the funds were permitted to be spent on permit fees, to provide the 25% match. Okay, here is our total project statistics. We had 45 loan recipients. We spent a total, and that would be 45 counties, and there were some cities. So 45 counties and cities that entered into contracts. And of course, if you remember, we have 88 counties and probably about another 10 cities that have on-site systems in their jurisdiction. So we had a little bit less than half of the counties participate. And I'll talk some reasons about why counties chose to not participate. We had did a total of 471,000, I'll spit that out, dollars in upgrades, and we were able to repair and replace 455 systems. Okay, I'd like to step through some of the responsibilities of the borrowers, Ohio EPA's responsibilities, the local entity's responsibilities, and what ODH's role was. So the borrower had to agree to enter into, and so this would be the counties, so the counties that came forward and said, yes, we want money. They had to agree to enter into a loan agreement with Ohio EPA, and these were principal forgiveness loans. So essentially what it meant was they got the loan for 0% interest and there was no principal repayment. Ohio EPA did not and could not call it a grant because then that triggers a whole set of different reporting and record-keeping requirements. So with the use of the ARRA money coming through the State Revolving Loan Fund, it was identified, and this might be critical for you guys if you decide to do something like this, it had to be identified as a principal forgiveness loan at 0% interest. The borrower also had the responsibility to review the applicants. They had to go out and seek the applicants. They had to determine their eligibility, income eligibility, including demonstration of the applicant's ability to provide 25% matching funds, their verification of their income levels, the selection of the applicants, and the award of contracts to the installers for the installations. So there's a lot of work that's done locally to do the project. But I think it worked out pretty well. As I said, a lot of our CHIP programs, community housing improvement programs, the block grant folks, they already have a system in place for obtaining income information from people. And we actually didn't really set any criteria on that. We allowed them to use whatever process they were accustomed to using locally to verify income. Most of them were using the CHIP program income eligibility requirements or verification requirements. And so far, I know that Ohio EPA has been audited on this program, and so far that's not been identified as an issue at all. So they had that responsibility to do all of those things. And then many of them, especially if they were working through the CHIP programs or the Community Block Development Grant programs, they also, if those programs were able to provide part of the match, they coordinated that. And they coordinated if people got donations from other sources or whatever. Okay, the borrower also had to work very closely with the local health district. So it was really critical that a good working relationship was established between the local health district and the the entity that was implementing the program, whether that was the CHIP or block grant folks. And so they needed to obtain verification from the local health district that the system was failing and in need of an upgrade or repair. And then once the system was installed and permitted by the local health district, they would need to obtain a copy of and verify that the completed system was installed and that it had been approved, by the local health district. Then the borrower also had to submit an invoice to Ohio EPA, the Division of Environmental and Financial Assistance. They're the division of Ohio EPA that manages the Water Pollution Control Loan Fund for payments of the system upgrade, including required documentation, and then process that payment to the contractor. So essentially what happened was the block grant folks or whoever was implementing or the county submitted an invoice to Ohio EPA, and it ended up that Ohio EPA asked them to bundle the invoices because it's a lot easier for, EPA is accustomed to paying out big chunks of money to cities and sewer districts, so they weren't really accustomed to doing this on a little bit smaller scale. So it was a learning process, but they developed a contract, they set up a mechanism to get those payments processed. They asked the counties to bundle their invoices, and then they cut checks back to the block grant folks or the counties, and then the county was responsible for then paying out the contractor or the installer. Okay, the owner. What were their roles and responsibilities? Well, other than obtaining the cash for the 25% match, they had to provide permission for site access and installation of the system upgrade. So they had to obtain a permit. They had to allow the local health district to come out if that required a site and soil evaluation by a soil scientist or the local health district. And that was done. Actually, we did require that, so they had to allow that access. So they had to allow access to their property multiple times. So not only did they have to do all the things required to get an installation permit, the site and soil evaluation, various site reviews, and then the installation part, they also had to agree to obtain an ongoing operation permit as required by the local health district and dependent upon the type of system that they ended up installing. And if they ended up installing a replacement discharging system, then they had to agree to continue to obtain coverage under the general permit. Okay, the roles and responsibilities of the local health districts. They were required to assist the borrower with identifying failing systems and provide information to the system owner on the availability of the funds. And our local health districts, I think, did a really good job of that. They went out, they reached out to people, they put notices in the paper, they got on their local radio stations. I mean, they did everything they could do to try to let people know that these funds were available. They would coordinate or either coordinate with the soil scientist, or they would conduct the site and soil evaluations. They would issue the permits. They would do all the normal activities that a local health district would do with regard to permitting and installing a system. And then they would do those final inspections to ensure a successful system installation. Now, we did set some criteria in the contracts regarding system design, because at the time that we did this project was the time when our law was suspended. We were required to go back and adopt our 1977 rules, and local health districts, as is currently our status, are allowed to adopt their own local rules as well that build on our state rules. And so we were concerned, not all of our local health districts at the time were ensuring that systems were not being constructed in saturated soils and things like that. So we put some minimum criteria into the contracts where we said that you had to ensure that you met a reasonable vertical separation distance, that system designs would not create nuisances if they were sustainable, that you would agree to implement an operation and permit program, and things like that. And so in part, that's why some local health districts chose not to go after the money, because they didn't want to do those things. And so that was a little bit of the challenge that we faced. But there were other reasons that local health districts didn't do it, because some already had funding mechanisms in place and they didn't need to pursue this funding mechanism. Okay, the local health district also had to certify to the borrower when the system upgrade had been completed, or the installation or the replacement or the repair, and then they had to issue an operation permit to the system owner and then maintain that operation permit. And if it was a discharging system and that required the homeowner to obtain coverage, they were responsible if it was a discharging system and they were required to obtain coverage under the general permit, then it was also the responsibility of the local health district to work with that owner to fill out the notice of intent form and assist them in getting that coverage, because most homeowners wouldn't have any idea on how to work with Ohio EPA to get coverage under a general permit. So they had to help them work and step through that process. Okay, local health districts, as I said, they were required to implement an inspection and operation program for system improvements assisted by the ARRA funds at the local health district level to track the systems and ensure that regular system maintenance was conducted. And of course, our local health districts are authorized in law to be able to establish a fee for operation permits and maintaining those programs. And then, of course, the local health district agreed to conduct any enforcement as necessary to ensure compliance for the life of the system. Okay, our role in the process, the Ohio Department of Health, we were kind of the coordinator. We assisted borrowers in local health districts with questions. We got information out. We had regular conference calls with the local health districts that were implementing the program and the county agencies. We worked a lot with the CHIP programs. We helped answer questions for area homeowners. We provided technical support out to the local health district with system evaluations and designs and permits and inspections and any challenges that they may have found with any particular site. And this was really critical because, like I said, we had a number of local health districts, 45 that were participating. There were just a lot of questions. How do we handle this? How do we do this? So we found that if you establish a program like this, frequent communication is really critical. You know, set up a regular conference call. I mean, we have a standing conference call with our local health districts the last Monday of every month in Sewage. And it's just an opportunity. They know when it's going to happen. We send out an agenda every time. And that way, and this is what we did with this project, we just set up some standing calls every 2 weeks initially and then went out to every 4 weeks just to be able to be there to answer those questions. And not only was ODH on the call, but Ohio EPA was on the call as well, because then they were able to answer questions related to the contracts, invoicing, how they did it. And so that really helped avoid a lot of mistakes and problems and things like that. We were able to head them off. Okay, what was Ohio EPA's role? So, of course, they're the ones getting the money. They're the ones that really had the lion's share of the work from the state agency perspective. So they reviewed the project applications from the counties or the cities, and they entered into these loan agreements with the borrowers. They coordinated all the contractual and reporting requirements. They reviewed and approved payment requests and authorized the disbursement of funds to the local government entities. Now, the ARRA project had requirements for environmental reviews that came through, and so they were able to, they did like a global, some of the global environmental reviews for the ARRA funding and coming through the SRF loan program. And I know this was a little bit of a challenge for them because their contracts were more suited towards working with major cities and entities, so they had to modify the contracts and working at a little bit more smaller scale. Like I said, they got to the point where they realized it was easier for them to process these payments if the invoices were bundled. So it was kind of a living and learning experience on that. And I think that if you guys would decide to move forward with something like this in Michigan, I know that they'd be more than happy to talk to the folks who might be doing this to help them with all those particular details of how they did it or share example contracts and things like that. There were some challenges definitely in moving through this that were related to ARRA. And probably the biggest one was Davis-Bacon, and that was the requirement to pay prevailing wage. A lot of these installers are mom and pop, sole proprietors. They're small installers. Some of them were larger ones. They didn't pay prevailing wage, and so they had to pay prevailing wage, and that had to be guaranteed part of the contract. Buy American, that wasn't so much of a big deal because we reviewed our entire list of approved systems, and we only had one product, and that was PureFlow by Board & Mona, and they certified to us that the majority of the product was manufactured here in the United States, because peat does come from Ireland, and so they were able to certify that, so we were able to use their products. We did have requirements for contractor bonding in ARRA, and our contractors, for the most part, right now through the local health district rules, are required to be bonded, and so for the most part that was met, but there were a few local health districts who weren't requiring bonding that had to do so. And then, of course, all the reporting requirements. And I know that Ohio EPA has been subject to audits. We were the only, as far as I know, only one of 2 states that authorized ARRA money for decentralized system repair and replacement. I guess West Virginia did, but they did it more for a couple of decentralized cluster systems. So we were really the only state that actually got money out to individual homeowners. So there's, I know they've gone through a substantial amount of auditing on that. For them, it was adapting to a decentralized contract process at a state level. Like I said, EPA was accustomed to getting money out to cities. They weren't accustomed to getting money down to individuals. So that process, had to be worked through. They had to monitor and work with the local bidding process, and that was working with local legal and administrative structure. In Ohio, cities and counties can adopt their own local rules for contracting. And so some of the county prosecutors said, okay, county, you're going to have to go out for bid and, put a bid package out and have it out for so many days and so on. Well, if you'll recall, the ARRA money came out in early 2009. In working through all this process, the contracts didn't get out to many of the local health districts and back and sign until like June or July, sometimes into August. And then they wanted everything in contract by November 1st. And so it was really challenging. And we had 1 or 2 local health districts that withdrew because their prosecutor was adamant that they had to go through a competitive bidding process. And they had to have the bid out for so many days, so they weren't going to be able to make the time frames. So that's something that you need to be aware of when you go through this process. I think when we talk about the fact that the funding is being made available this year because we have a longer time frame, the bidding and the local contractual bidding process isn't going to be as big of a problem for us this year, but it definitely was for the ARRA money. And then, of course, you have all these local prosecutors and all these questions about the contracts and so on, but, they worked through them all one by one, and it did work out. And then they had to ensure there was some challenges with documenting income level and homeowner match. Because we didn't provide specific guidance about that, we let the individual organizations at the county level identify how they were going to do that, and we didn't have like a uniform set of guidelines. I think there were some challenges there as well. Okay, future funding. Well, we're really excited. We felt that ARRA was a big success, and I know that our governor was very pleased with it. US EPA seemed to be pleased, and then when Lisa Jackson came to Ohio, she acknowledged the program. And so we were happy because we helped almost 500 people repair and replace their systems and abate nuisances that could probably have never been taken care of and still be causing nuisances to this day. And I think it was a true reflection of actually being able to get federal money down to people. So often I think, people feel frustrated because states get federal money, but does it really get down to help people on a one-on-one level? I think the other thing we saw too was, and one of the questions that was asked of us by the ARRA folks at the federal level that we had to document was how many jobs were saved. You have to do that for that money. And so we reached back out to our local health districts and we said, talk to your installers and give us some feedback on how many were affected by this money. And we actually had a number of local health districts get back to us and say, yeah, I had this guy tell me and that company tell me that they were able to keep their staff employed over the winter because of this project. And so that was really good to hear that there were companies that were able to stay afloat, and it really helped them stay afloat during the tough economic, during the height of the recession, and it really helped them there. So there were some good things that came out of it. What we're going to do in the future, essentially, we are going to continue this. Ohio EPA, I think, saw that even despite their reservations, saw that it was very successful, that it was heralded as a very good thing to do by the governor's office, by the legislature, by US EPA. They were very supportive. And so they've agreed to provide, actually they have just advised me that they're going to allow for a full $6 million be made available through the State Revolving Loan Fund to continue to fund this, implement this program, almost in an identical fashion to the way we did it through the ARRA money. So they're essentially, since Congress, when they reauthorized money out to the State Revolving Loan Funds, from what I understand, they continued the requirement that a certain percentage of the projects be Green Reserve projects. Decentralized are included in that category, and so Congress also allowed states to continue to be able to offer principal forgiveness loans. So that was two critical things that had to happen at the federal level to continue this program, from what I understand. They had to be able to offer principal forgiveness loans at 0% interest, and they had to be able to do these types of projects, had to be able to qualify, which they do. So in this year, in 2011, we actually had a period where we were accepting, where Highway EPA was accepting nominations in December of 2010 from local health districts for the funding. They identified that they'd make $5 to $6 million available. I believe they received about $13 million in requests from local health districts, actually from the counties, you know, in coordination with the local health districts. So we were really thrilled to see that. I think a lot of counties, when ARRA went on, they said, okay, we're going to sit back and we're going to wait, or we don't know if we're going to move forward, and they didn't move forward. But then when they saw that it could be done, that a lot of other counties had success, because, you know, our counties talk to each other a lot, and they saw that, you know, the county next door was able to do this and really help people out, that they've now stepped forward and asked for funding. So we're going to have the full $6 million available out to local health districts. Where we're at in the process is Ohio EPA is in the process of finalizing the program plan. The program plan has to go out for public comment. It also has to go to USEPA for approval. I believe that happens in this 30-day period. So very shortly, I think in the next couple weeks, the program plan will be out for comment. It'll be out for comment for 30 days. It'll also go to USEPA for approval at the same time. Then at that point, I think either towards the end of that 30-day period or upon completion of the 30-day period, they will start to send the contracts out to the local government entities for signature. And then once they're signed locally, then they come back to Ohio EPA, they're signed, and then the local entities can begin their projects. We have some new funding guidelines this year based upon our experiences from the ARRA project. And essentially, here, we're going to be looking at the Health and Human Services 2010 Poverty Guidelines for 1 to 4 person homes with a maximum income level of $22,050. So homeowners with up to 100% of those poverty guidelines will receive 100% funding. And if you look at the HSS poverty guidelines, as you increase the number of persons, you get additional money. So they're taking actually the top level of 4 persons. A 4-person home, 100% poverty is $22,050. If you only had 1 person, it's less money than that. But they're going to say anywhere from 1 to 4 persons, if they're under $22,050, they'll qualify for 100% funding. So we really felt that was important, and they really saw that people, obviously, who were at those income levels couldn't come up with a 25% match, or they struggled with it, or that prevented them from being able to get the funding. So that's a big change to our funding this time. So they would get 100% funding. The funding will also cover their permit fee. So the permit fee can also be included in that funding. Then homeowners that were within 100 to 200%, and that would be income levels of $22,000 to about $44,000, would receive 85% funding with a 15% homeowner match. So this will allow for those community housing improvement program funds or the block development funds, they'll go a lot further now because they only have to cover 15%. Actually, even people at this income level, they were struggling to come up with the 25%, so this will enable more people to become eligible. Once again, we did request Ohio EPA to bump it up to 300% with 75% funding. At this time, they haven't agreed to do that, but we're going to continue to try to twist their arm to allow us to do that. So I don't know if we'll be successful there or not. We did get a lot of feedback from the local health districts that if the funding level had been bumped up to 300%, that they could have covered a lot more folks. I mean, we did have some local health districts that ended up turning back money because they weren't able to find enough people to qualify. And part of the problem was the match amount, or part of the problem was they just made a little bit too much money. They were between that $44,000 and $61,000 income level. And I don't know, I just didn't understand. We just, you know, $66,000, I mean, just to even have to be able to come up with a couple $1,000s is challenging in this day and age. I think we all know that. So hopefully with these changes, we'll be able to see more people be eligible. And as I mentioned, the permit cost can be included in the principal forgiveness loan. EPA is going to require all draft contracts to be submitted to ensure compliance with the program requirements. They're also going to ask local health districts to limit the number of contractors they work with to 5. This is because they are required, as they found, they have to review all the contracts locally. And so this really helps cut down on the amount of time they have in doing this, because their resources are limited also. I'm sure, as you've heard, every state across the nation, is getting, all the agencies are getting budget cuts. So they're putting a limit on the number of contractors that they can contract with. But still, it does get money out to local businesses. At least 5 local businesses will benefit from that. And then you got to think about the fact that not only are those 5 businesses, those 5 installers benefiting, those companies whose systems are being installed benefits, and then there'll be a long-term benefit because those systems will require service. They will have service contracts, or somebody will be servicing those systems. The homeowner may be doing service if it's a simple system, but that will also help support the economy because you're going to have service providers down the road who will be also getting income from those service contracts. So it's kind of a win-win all the way around for everybody. Okay, and here's the contact information for both Jim Bonk and Dave Rife. On the prior slide is my contact information. But I know they'd be very willing. I know when I talked to Jim, he was very sorry he wasn't able to do this today. Like I said, they're right in the middle of trying to get the program improvement plan out for comment and to get it to USEPA, and so they're really tied up. But they said they'd be more than willing to answer questions as best as possible. I think it's easiest to shoot them an email if you have questions. It's a little bit harder to get hold of them by phone. But anyway, that's kind of in a nutshell what we did, the successes that we had, the challenges that we faced in implementing the project. So I don't know, Dendra, at this point, if we want to go ahead and entertain questions.
Thank you, Rebecca. There were a lot of issues that we tried to with a previous project, but it's one of those COUs might take worse to get the money to people. But to get a hold of the ARRA money itself, which was a big question. So the whole final period
no, I could hear words, but I couldn't understand them.
Rebecca?
Yes.
I was wondering if Ohio EPA had a definition for failure that is being used as part of this.
Yes, and I probably should have mentioned that. We actually put together a whole guidance document that went out to the county agency and the local health district, and we had specific definitions for failure.
Would that guidance document be available?
Yes, yes. However, it's best for me to get that information to all of you, whether it's through Dendra or wherever you want me to send it, I can do that.
You would send that to me?
Okay.
And then I'll put it out onto a designated place on our site for all of the references to the presentation.
Right, and would it be helpful, okay, we can put the guidance out there, would you like to see like examples of the contract forms and things like that as well?
Yeah, I think that's best too, yes.
Okay.
Very good, thank you.
And I guess maybe just to elaborate on that question, we do have a definition of public health nuisance in the revised code, and so that's essentially what the Ohio revised code, so that's what we use. So if the system, and that definition includes if there's a mechanical failure, missing components, sewage effluent at the surface, fecal or discharges that exceed fecal coliform levels, all of those things are included in our public health nuisance definition, and that's what we used to constitute failure.
I'm curious to know if there's any other state agencies that are taking a look at any potential ripple effects that $5 million would be brought into the local community. There's statistics that are related periodically that for every dollar spent locally, for $5. Is there any effort to look at these effects of bringing that money in?
Did we do an economic analysis, I guess is your question, of the benefit of bringing that money in?
Yes.
Yeah, no, we have not. I mean, we'd like to do that. but we just don't have the resources. I would have loved to work with an economist to do that, to be able to quantify that benefit. And actually, our Bureau of Environmental Health here has been thinking about if we could find some resources to set that aside to hire an economist to do that, but we haven't done it.
Hi, Rebecca. I got one question. Were the failures prioritized? Meaning, I know you talk about direct discharge. I know a little bit about that, where basically it goes through our aeration system, and then maybe it rains in the ditch. That's pretty much what that is.
Yes, our direct discharges in Ohio are typically, well, they can be straight septic tanks with discharge to a ditch or a stream. They can be aeration units, or typically older aeration units to just straight discharge. And sometimes there were septic tanks through sand filters to discharge. But I think we left it up to the local health districts to prioritize. I mean, I think at this point it was such a learning experience. I mean, you had all these multiple factors coming into play. You had whether or not you could get people to respond. It was whether or not people could come up with the match. You know, and so there were so many variables. I think it was kind of a first come, first serve.
Right, right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Rebecca, I did have one question.
Mm-hmm.
Was the direct loan site to the municipality or to the health department? And did they then portion the money back out to the individual?
Yeah, the loan was with the county agency. Typically, the county commissioners signed the loan agreement. And then the county commissioners delegated the administration of the project to, sometimes it was the local community, it was the county community action. We have like what's called community action. I don't know if you have similar entities in Michigan or not, but we have community action. We have the community housing improvement programs at a county level, and sometimes they have these community block development grant programs. So, but regardless, the county commissioners identified who was going to implement the money, and then there was close coordination with the local health districts. This year, actually for the funding for this year, Ohio EPA has relaxed the agreement, and they're allowing, the contracts can't be directly with local health districts, but local health districts can serve as the county agency to administer the program.
Question for you. In Michigan here, when we fill out SRF project plans, they get priority rankings. They get scored.
Yes.
And they all get picked. Now they get ranked from about 0 points to 800. And they take those project plans and they only have so much money, to provide. And there's more project plans. They request money than is available. So you have to score on the top end of that project plan. How do you score as high as you do so you know you have $6 million, or are you waiting to find out if you even qualify this next year because the project plans haven't been prioritized or ranked yet?
Yeah, that's a good question. I kind of wish Jim was here to answer it. I know that Ohio EPA has a similar priority and ranking system and scoring system, and basically what it boils down to is an executive decision was made at the governor's office level and at the director's levels that this money was going to be set aside, and it was set aside. I mean, they scored it. I think they assigned it that score, and or if that was necessary, or the money was just simply set aside. And I know when I talked to Jim Bonk about this year's money, he said, yeah, they were just, maybe I should repeat this, but a little bit concerned because, quite honestly, they set aside the full $6 million for these projects, and they only set aside $5 million for combined or overflows, and they figured some of the cities might be a little upset about that. But
yeah, okay.
And you may want to contact Jim directly about that, how they handled that with the scoring, because I'm not exactly certain.
I have your video screen enlarged here. It's right over Jim's contact, so I will make sure that we have that. The one question I have is that Ohio EPA was there is a little tightly controlled. I always have to spend like twice. Like, so they would get returned back and found something in the range of 80,000 sales just
Yes.
Are you implementing any other programs or methods to get the greater bulk of the issue addressed with the
Okay, well, I think I heard most of that question, but I think the question was, are we implementing any other programs and what actions are we doing to address the substantial number of failures and that cost? We also work with U.S. Department of Agriculture. You know, they have the 502 and the 504 programs available for the rural areas. For lower income folks, they can qualify for a low interest loan, so that we do try to push that information out there. Also, can't remember if it's 502 or 504, but one of them provides actual grant money for folks, I think, who are over 62 that are low income. I know some counties have had a lot of success in getting higher amounts of the Community Housing Improvement Program and the block grant money allocated for system repair and replacement. The other thing I think that will be biggest for the biggest advantage for Ohio down the road is that when our law was changed here last year, and we had a whole committee, a lot of discussion that went through how do we need to modify this initial enabling legislation that was put in place in 2005 or 2006, and how do we need to change that, because it was suspended for so many years as everybody was debating about these changes that needed to be made. And one of the biggest things that we came up with and identified was a program that's been implemented in one of our county health departments that's been extremely successful. And we now call it, in the law, it's called incremental repair and replacement. And that allows for our local health district to actually enter into an agreement with a homeowner to set up a plan for that incremental repair or replacement of that system. So say, for example, they enter into a 5-year agreement where in year 1 the homeowner agrees to, let's say, replace the septic tank or install an aerobic treatment unit, and then they see what impact that has on the system. So let's say, for example, we have a septic tank, the leach lines are failing. Well, they'll allow them, step 1 might be, well, step 1 actually is to look at measures to reduce water use out to the system to try to prevent the hydraulic overloading. And so we work with property owners to do that. Step 2 is looking at replacing a component. So essentially they develop a plan to replace component by component over a period of time, and that will help people spread out the cost of repairing and replacing those systems. And that's something that we're working on right now as we do rule development on how we're going to kind of spell that out in the rules. We want to keep it fairly simple and flexible. I mean, our goal is to get systems replaced, and our thought is if somebody can go in and replace the aerobic treatment unit, it's a water quality, and a septic tank with an aerobic treatment unit, it's a water quality improvement. So everything is an incremental water quality improvement. So those are really the things we're doing right now, other than the fact that with so many discharging systems, that's such a concern to us. And I think what we're really truly going to have to consider is relaxing our requirements for our replacement systems. We have fairly strict requirements for installing new systems. We require site and soil evaluation. They have to maintain a vertical separation distance. Right now it's set locally above seasonal saturation or any other limiting condition. For most of the products that we're authorizing, we're requiring a 12 to 18-inch vertical separation distance. They have to use the Tyler table to determine soil infiltration loading rates, and then which also includes determining the linear loading rates and length along contour. And meeting length along contour can be very challenging on a replacement for replacement systems. You have a smaller lot, narrower lot, they can't get length along contour. And that's primarily to ensure good hydraulic dispersal in the subsurface. So what we have been talking about, and as I said, these are all things we're working through right now as we're doing our rule development, is looking at maybe requiring some pretreatment of the sewage before it goes to the soil, relaxing the requirements for length along contour so people can fit the systems on lot and not be forced into a discharging system. And hopefully, and maybe even relaxing the requirements for our vertical separation distance in low-risk areas. Our law also allows us the ability to identify different standards in low-risk and high-risk settings. So, and we haven't worked this out yet because, like I said, we've got a schedule of topics we're talking about every month in our rule development, and this is something that will be coming up this summer that we'll be talking about. But we can actually go in and identify, okay, what's a low-risk setting and what's a high-risk setting, and maybe say, okay, let's say we have a rural area, they're all large lots, over 5 acres, that's a development. And maybe we can say, okay, we can relax the vertical separation distance to seasonal saturation down from 18 inches to 6 inches, or something like that, because you know that you've got additional isolation distance or buffer to assist with treatment and, you know, maybe eventual die-off or whatever, even if it does get to saturated conditions. So we're trying to take a fairly practical approach, because quite honestly, we really got beat up by the legislature about the 2007 rules we had out there. I think were very good. They were very effective in ensuring that systems are treating sewage and they were sustainable. And I think we kind of have to take a step back and say, okay, what do we have to look at from a practical perspective and try to achieve a balance between treatment and sustainability and cost. So we're trying to look at all those different ways to help deal with the cost and our challenging soils.
Yes. With the DNA role through the SRF, you know, you borrow $1 billion or $6 million. How is that being repaid?
Well, it's not. It's not being repaid. This is actual 0% interest principal forgiveness money. So this money is going out and it's not being repaid.
Did it strictly speak to an SRF project, or is it strictly ARRA?
Well, you know, from what I understand, you know, Congress has now allowed states to make decisions about how they dispense these funds. And so up to a certain percentage of the SRF funds can be principal forgiveness 0%. So essentially, you know, a certain percentage of the money can be free money. But then the rest of it has to have, you know, a repayment schedule and an interest rate.
And I really want to thank you, Rebecca, for conquering a mess during the technology challenge and working through state firewalls and installing bits and pieces that make your IT people really nervous. And thank you so much for going to Jen. I can appreciate that he's a little bit preoccupied with other things today. Great program. It lists finally of how flexible and bendable and makes it work. It's fabulous. And thank you so much for spending time with us.
Thank you very much for having me today. I appreciate it.
Okay, and to log out, you just go to Relieve Night Quit, and I'm going to leave the Jim's contact information up here.